which I guess, if we are talking about the laser experiment, his name is Danny Gola. He is the guy that found it all. He's got his website is codereality.com. So I'd say if anybody's interested in the how the story started, when he first saw it, the specs of the laser, how do you get the laser? He goes over, how you can either build it yourself or he'll ship you one out. He has some interviews as well, and then he also his podcast that I mentioned I was on is called Dan Go Thoughts, and he's got some really good interviews on that as well. So I'd say if anybody's interested in getting really like I said, the full story, I would recommend going to his stuff. But excuse me, I wanted to share my perspective on his show once again to bring the mental health aspect to DMT, but then also to take some of the maybe not necessarily sensational aspect of it away, but more just anytime you're messing with DMT, like this isn't something that you can be messing around with willy nilly. And oh yeah, I want to see this code in the reality, so I'm going to use DMT, or even have this be a prompt for you to start using DMT because, and I mentioned this in the video that I do that DMT is going to overpower the experience like a millionfold. The laser is you really have to put DMT at the forefront of it, and yes, there's some aspects to how much you dose and do you microdose it and do you use a vape pen as opposed to blasting the crystals and do you do one hit as opposed to five and how long afterwards do you smoke, do you actually look at the laser, and these are all things, excuse me, that I'd like to talk to Danny about as far as the data points that he's gotten from what he's collected. But my first kind of take into it was, all right, I'm gonna set everything up and everything was good, and I always have this routine of kind of respect, reverence, prayer. What is my intention going into each session? And not to necessarily say that I rushed it or was just kind of demanding, like, all right, well, I'm going to see this laser. I'm the DMT guy and I want to write about it and talk about it. So here it is. And that first time that I tried to look at the laser, I got blasted off into that DMT space and realm. And I just kind of needed to sit back and have that session go through. There was really no way that I was going to sit there and look at the laser. And it kind of smacked me back to reality to be like, listen, this experiment needs to be done with, like I said, the proper precaution. And this is somebody that's done DMT hundreds and hundreds of times. And that's why I wanted to bring that perspective where if there's anybody that feels comfortable with their mind and body being in that vibratory realm of DMT, it is certainly I. But, um, I mentioned it's really important still to set the environment and the intention. So set up the laser, but still you want to make sure you have your pillows and your blankets and your glass of water and, have kind of still make sure you're not in a strictly experimental data collection type mentality because I don't think that's the right way to approach this. I know when I had the best results and that when I was able to really kind of zone right into it and actually see the laser, um, see the actual code, it was laying comfortably with my head properly suspended on a pillow with the laser actually only, a couple inches off the ground where I wasn't sitting propped up in an uncomfortable chair with a bunch of lights on me being recorded by a camera. And I don't think, like I said, if that's what you're trying to do, uh, I don't think the results will get there. Because it is a part combination of elevated and heightened senses through the DMT, but also kind of getting into a deep meditative trance where you can zone in on it and see through it. And that's where he discusses the kind of analogy of looking through those magic eye books from back in the day where it was all kind of squiggly on the pages, but once you look through it, that 3D image would pop out. And it is very similar to that, where you have to kind of look through it and see beyond it in order to actually see the layers. And then actually, the other night, me and my girlfriend were kind of doing an experiment, and we were using the analogy of if you've ever looked under a microscope, and as you're trying to zoom in and get that perfect level of clarity and crispness of image, you kind of have to go through different layers of vision, and that's really what you have to do in this laser because you have to pull between the layers to actually see it. It's a like I said, it's something that you need to practice. But again, once you see it, I can see why he and the people that have are kind of saying, "What the fuck? What is this? And what does this mean?" And I don't think anybody says they have the answer to those questions. It's more just let's try to get some data and information on this. I think what DMT does in general. So big picture, whether, once again, tie it back to mental health and all of that, but now bringing it back to the laser. Uh, I think it allows you as a human to shed that plaque and then allow you to enrich and enhance your human antenna. So, enhance your consciousness, or how your ability to receive that external consciousness and the energy that's out there. So I think that's one of the things that DMT does allow. So, and can you maybe see the laser without DMT? I think yes. Can some people see it just because they're already connected and heightened? I'm pretty sure of it. Could there be even some, autistic people, or some people that are heightened in other ways? Maybe deaf people that can see better. And that's where I think the research needs to go. Is, are there ways of seeing this code without just, smoking DMT? And I think that that is going to happen and pan out over time. But the ability to just, as a human, connect, be comfortable, get into that vibratory state where you're able to receive that ethereal outside information that you're normally not, I think is one of the steps and processes that allows you to see this code in laser. Um, but I guess, so for me, when I approached it, I was skeptical because if anybody's ever looked at, and actually I've got one of his latest lasers right here. But if anybody's ever looked at a laser, you can see moving stuff. Like the laser naturally has swirly movement in it. I mean, it's a dynamic thing. So, all right. So if anybody were to walk into a room and just look at that, you would see swirling shit from 10 feet away, from 2 feet away, that there's really some, like I said, dynamic movement within the laser. That is not the code. And, that's where, and you're not looking at the surface where that movement is. You're looking, like, if you're looking at that post there, you're really trying to look, and you are. It almost seems like several feet beyond that, and that's where you really need that specific laser, and you can see how thick that band is, because it's not a pinpoint laser, and it's not a thin, like if you were to go to Home Depot and get a measuring laser, those have a really thin, aspect, where these lasers have that diffusion, or that piece on it that spreads it out. So you're looking through that opening that laser creates, and you're actually, what's up, brother?
How you doing, brother? Sorry for being so late.
No, we were just talking about life and love and connection. We're just getting into the laser.
Yeah. Amazing.
Well, he told me you were coming. Danny, thank you for joining us, buddy.
Absolutely.
Just to keep you up to speed as far as what we talked about the laser, really, we spent the time talking about life and love and connection and all that, but then talking about, really, I put DMT at the forefront of the experiment, that you still need to really give it the respect, the reverence, set your intention, set the environment. It's
Mhm.
not something to be played with and joked with. And, you really need to put DMT, I think, at the front, to make sure you're not getting overwhelmed, or kind of blasted off into a place. But then we really haven't talked about, my experience getting into it the first couple of time, or really even setting up any of the procedure or protocol. So when I got exposed to it, I heard some of this stuff and was like, wow, I want to check it out for myself with my own bullshit filter. And that's something I'm going to apply to, we talked about this before, recording, or right at the beginning, that's something that I think I really hold value, is my authenticity and rawness. And I wanted to apply that to this laser experiment. And, uh, that's where hopefully maybe I can add some, just a data point to it. So,
Absolutely.
I'll
but
ask.
and if I could, maybe the one, well, not one, but the big data point that I could add to the experiment, if anybody's looking for practical, uh, application of this, or if they're looking at the laser and maybe haven't seen it yet, because it is something that does take a little bit of practice, and it is something, like I said, you have to kind of train your eyes to see it, and to see through the different levels. But when Danny mentioned, the geometry of it and the distinct kind of pattern, that's where I really want to make sure that that's a distinct difference with me. So I mentioned, and right before you came on, Danny, we were talking about the normal swirling of a laser. So anybody can look at a laser projected on the wall, and you're going to see movement. It's always dynamic. It's always, there's all this weird tiny shit going on. That is not the code. That's the normal movement of a laser that anybody can see at any point. And even when you're looking through the laser and into that, like I said, it looks like 2 or 3 or 4 feet, or even kind of infinite, like beyond the laser. That isn't, that in my opinion is not the code. And you
Mhm.
do see a lot of swirly movement shit. The first time that I saw it actually come out, it was that kind of shock, like, oh, that's it." And for me, it was just very distinct, clear, crisp columns. So whether it be column or rows, it was just very distinct lines of falling, cascading, that was in its own category. but then within it, it was each in its own little like pixel. Within that pixel, it was moving and spinning. And as those columns were going by the side, as the symbols kind of lined up with one another, then there was a 90-degree kind of like horizontal movement that kind of came out of it as well as the symbols kind of lined up and matched. But it was very, like I said, very distinct columns, rows, 90-degree angle, which is different from the chaotic normal movement dynamic of the laser and all the swirly shit. And within each one of those pixels, that distinct symbol. And people, like I said, I've had people, well, what is it? Like, is it? It, and I kind of agree with Danny. I don't know. It doesn't matter. Like I could sketch them on a paper and kind of show you what it looks like, and people have done that. But the fact that that clear, distinct grid work came out of it with symbols that moved in a very distinct pattern, unique geometry to everything else around it, including the chaotic DMT space. So that DMT realm in its own right has its own movements and you know, uh, physics to it. The code kind of stood beyond and separate to that as well. And I think that's what kind of stood out to me where it really was once you got to that perfect layer of looking within it and at that perfect magnification of your eyes or whatever, it clearly stood out. And that's maybe that's what I want to convey to people where it's now what it is, what it means, what the symbols are, what that means to our human species. I'm open to explore that. But from when people say that it's not there or that it's just the normal laser movement or just the normal DMT space movement, I would like to say, no, it's not. And it is a clear code.
And if you look closely, I don't know if you already saw it, Adam, but on the surface of the wherever the laser hits the wall, if you look closely, you will see another layer of a different looking some kind of digits, and some of them are even, and this one gets weird. Some of it is even like code, like almost like English letters on a blimp. You know how they have these commercials? It's just the message kind of runs.
Yo, so it's like the ticker symbol at the stock market.
Yes,
So
exactly.
my
And that I
girlfriend.
think is in the light because when we're moving the light, it's moving with it. Continue.
So my girlfriend and I have done the experiment. She has not seen that inner code that we were talking about,
Mhm.
but that ticker running left to right. So my experience when I'm seeing the code is it's typically dropping from top to bottom. This when she was looking at it that and that running code and I saw it as well was yeah that ticker symbol and that's exactly what she said. She says, "Did you see that? How it's moving just like that?" So
Yeah,
yeah,
so you can see
and
both at the same time.
before you got on too, I was saying it's very similar to if you've ever looked at a slide under a microscope where you're trying to adjust the actual zoom where you can get to the different levels of the cell or whatever you're looking at.
Exactly like that.
You juice there's multiple layers in the depths of that laser space, and finding what layer that code is in takes a little bit of challenge, and that's where I think the practice comes in. So I've
I think you're
used
exactly
using
right.
my eyelashes as kind of like screens to kind of.
Like this.
Yep,
Yep,
exactly.
yep.
I've used, wearing a hood, so that way you can block the laser and really get right to the side of it.
Mhm.
Uh, I've used and just for somebody that, you saw me smoking my pipe, when you light a pipe like that and you're kinda crossing your eyes, when you look at the glowing cherry amber in the pipe, it almost looks kinda pixelated, and I found like that's almost the same kinda, um, muscle tension that you need in your eyes when you're looking at the laser, which is just that you're not really looking at anything and it's almost too close but too far away, and yeah,
You
you have to
relax the
play with it.
gaze. Yeah,
But
yeah.
when
No,
you
you
see it, it's instant. And that to be perfectly honest with you, last night, excuse me, 2 nights ago, uh, I did I did it the laser experiment. I did all of the everything there, and I didn't see the laser. And there was a couple factors and a couple things and, you know, but it because it took some practice and I could see multiple different layers and I saw a lot of what was in the laser, but I didn't quite find that that one level because
Yeah,
again, having respect for it. If it's not I wasn't
absolutely.
gonna try to force something knowing that the first 4 times I was fortunate and again, I've seen what I've seen. I don't need anybody to believe me. I'm convinced that there's something different than just the normal laser movement and that it is a freestanding something. Now, once again,
Something,
is it a
yeah.
code that's a language? And I agree. Glad you brought that up. It could be an architectural code. It could be a whatever. It could code for anything. It doesn't just need to be a verbal language that's conveying thought. It could be something way more
Modulo with the
fundamental.
modular with the question, why would it be left to be recognizable in this way for beings like us?
Where the
Yeah.
last time I did it 4 times in a row, and all 4 times I saw it very pretty quickly, and I was able to get there right away.
Was it the same surface?
It was the same surface, but I do and I said this to Brad about the importance of really respecting it. I blasted pretty deep, and when I was sitting there
Mm.
looking at the laser, I kinda had to roll over, and it was just like, "Yeah, no, like, you've gotta
Yeah, you got it. You
you
got it.
gotta wait this one out a little bit," and then when I
Yeah.
came back, I don't wanna say I was too kinda, like, punch struck, but I couldn't get my eyes to kinda relax, and I just said, "You know, I'm not gonna try to push this."
Yeah.
So how I described it, like, is it almost like if you could consider, like, Tetris. Like, think about, like, those Tetris blocks falling. So each one of those Tetris blocks is its own cube or pixel, and that's how I saw columns of these stacked pixels, but then as each pixel was the symbol or shape, and as the symbols and shapes kind of cascaded down, the each column, whatever symbol was in the next parallel column, depending on the shape, would then make its own different shape because some of the like lines would match up, and that's where you had, like I said, all these cascading rain codes happening, but then as those switched and changed, it also made a horizontal code. But the fact that that was at a very distinct 90-degree angle, and it was really in its own lane, where typically everything else in that DMT space is fluid, dynamic. There are no real boundaries, and it's well, I shouldn't say there's no real boundaries, but there's no rigidity where the code was very rigid, and maybe that's kind of the best way to describe it. There's so much fluid dynamic movement in that DMT space and in the laser just looking at it. Even if you were to, if you were to take a hit of weed or a cigarette or cigar smoke and then blow a laser through it, you'll see all of that swirling movement, crazy shit, and that's always there. But that's there's no rigidity to that. There's so much fluid dynamic movement. The code is very rigid in its own space and clearly symbols that are cascading and switching. So that was
Mm.
with all the crazy shit that I saw in my hundreds of times of DMT space, that was the first time I saw something that seemed like it actually had some rigidity to it. Which in itself probably, and maybe that's the best way to describe it, that is the main oddity of it. So there's so much fluid dynamic movement in laser and DMT space, but yet somehow, some way, this code is its own thing that doesn't have those same physics, and that's the
Interesting.
weird part of it.
Well, I'm
And it's
sure.
and it's within different layers of, like, even in that laser, there's, whatever, say there's 20 levels or 20 layers of that laser pie or cake that you need to get through to find, say, layer 16 is where the actual code is. So you're looking through all of these kind of different layers of that, but once you find that layer 16 or whatever, wherever that actual code is, it's such a clear distinction from all the other layers of the cake, and that's what kind of blew my mind.
It's just interesting, man, that like, why can't we see that all the time?